Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The door clicked shut behind me as I stepped into the dimly lit hallway of our apartment, shedding the weight of another demanding Friday. The familiar sense of home was tinged with something else tonight, a faint but distinct scent that wasn't mine. It was cologne, crisp and woody, an undercurrent of citrus lingering in the air. Odd, I thought, considering I never wore that fragrance. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the mind, the leftovers of a crowded subway ride home. But the scent clung stubbornly to the air, weaving its way through the rooms like an uninvited guest. "Betty?" I called out. There was no answer, but the soft patter of music from the living room told me she was there. I loosened my tie as I walked, trying to shake off the unease that settled in my chest. The music grew louder as I approached, a sultry jazz number that Betty loved. I paused at the threshold, the scene before me slicing through the remnants of my denial. There she was, Betty, my wife of 6 years, less clothed than I'd ever seen her outside our bedroom. Her back was to me, her bare shoulders rhythmically moving in time with the breaths of the man beneath her. A man whose face was obscured by her cascading hair but whose presence was as real as the sharp sting of betrayal. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind raced, heart pounded, every detail burning into memory, the careless toss of her blouse, the way her laugh sounded more delighted than I had heard in years, the unfamiliar shoes by the sofa. "Betty!" My voice broke the spell, harsh and louder than I intended. She froze, her body tensing as she turned to face me. Her expression morphed from shock to horror in a split second. "James, it's not what it looks like," she stammered, clumsily disentangling herself as the man quickly stood, adjusting his disheveled clothes, his face now visible, marked by panic. "Not what it looks? Are you kidding me, Betty? What am I supposed to think?" My voice was a mix of rage and disbelief. The room felt stifling, the air thick with the scent of his cologne and her betrayal. "Please, let me explain," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. But the man, her lover, apparently a co-worker by the look of his familiar face from the company website, had already made his way to the door, mumbling apologies I barely registered. "No, Betty. Save it," I managed, the hurt manifesting as anger, bitter and cold. "I trusted you." With that, he was gone, the sound of the door slamming echoing through the now silent apartment. Betty was sobbing, her pleas for forgiveness mingling with the jazzy undertones that still played in the background, now a cruel soundtrack to my shattered reality. That night, I made a decision. The trust we had built over the years crumbled in an instant, irreparable. As I looked at Betty, who I thought I knew one thing for certain: forgiveness was off the table. I would file for divorce. Paths that had intertwined so closely would now diverge, forever. As the initial shock settled into a smoldering anger, my mind began to race with thoughts of retribution. How had this happened? How had I not seen the signs? The scent, the late nights, the sudden guardedness with her phone. I would find out everything. Every lie would be exposed. And my revenge would be thorough. For now, though, I needed to think, to plan. I left the apartment, the cool night air a small relief against the burning in my chest. The road ahead would be long, and I was just at the beginning. The city never sleeps, but tonight, its ceaseless buzz felt particularly invasive. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts a storm of anger and betrayal. The crisp night air did little to cool the fire of rage burning within me. After hours that felt like years, I finally found myself standing outside a dimly lit bar. A place where the music was loud enough to drown out my thoughts, at least for a while. I pushed through the crowd, the din of conversations and clinking glasses a welcome distraction. Settling onto a bar stool, I ordered a drink, my mind replaying the evening's disastrous revelation over and over. "Rough night, huh?" The bartender, a middle-aged man with an easy smile, slid a whiskey across the counter. "You could say that," I muttered, forcing a weak smile as I took a sip. I needed a plan, but first, I needed information. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through Betty's contacts, searching for any familiar names that could be linked to her lover. Then, I remembered, the coworker. I knew his name, his face. I needed more. "Hey, could I get the Wi-Fi password here?" I asked the bartender, who nodded and scribbled it on a napkin. Armed with internet access, I began my search. Social media profiles, company directories, anything that could tell me more about the man who had invaded my life. His profile was surprisingly public, filled with photos of him at company events, always a bit too close to Betty. A pang of jealousy hit me as I saw their interactions, comments filled with inside jokes and flirty undertones. As I dug deeper, I noticed something odd. Many of his posts were on Fridays, the same days I had begun noticing the scent. Posts about working late or team meetings that ran long. It was more than a coincidence. It was a pattern. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a clearer picture of deception. I screenshot everything, evidence for the upcoming storm. Another. The bartender's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "No, thanks. I've got work to do." Standing up, I left enough cash on the counter to cover my drink and headed out, a new determination settling in. Back home, the apartment felt empty, haunted by the ghost of my former life. Betty had gone, probably to a friend's. Good. I needed space, to think, to plan. Sitting at the dining table, I laid out the screenshots, emails, and messages I had gathered. It was all there, the timeline of their affair, disguised as business meetings and overtime hours. Every piece of evidence was another log on the fire of my revenge. I drafted an email, not to Betty, but to her lover. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated the right words. "You ruined my life. Now, it's my turn to upend yours. Expect me," I typed, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I hit send before I could reconsider. Sleep was elusive that night. Every sound was a reminder of the betrayal, every shadow a memory of a life that once was. But as dawn broke, my resolve hardened. This was only the beginning. Betty and her lover would soon learn the cost of their deceit. As the sun crept through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the room, I knew what had to be done. The path to retribution was clear, and I was ready to walk it. The stakes were high, but I had nothing left to lose. They would pay, and justice, in whatever form it took, would be mine. The morning light was harsh as I left the apartment, the city bustling around me. Today was different. Today, I was not just a betrayed husband. I was a man on a mission. I had one destination, the office where Betty and her lover worked. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was iron. I arrived just before noon, the lobby of the skyscraper bustling with the lunchtime crowd. My fingers clenched into fists as I entered. I could feel the adrenaline pumping, my every sense sharpened. I was not here to cause a scene, not yet. I was here for confrontation, for the truth. Taking a deep breath, I approached the reception desk. "I need to see Mark Stevens," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I'm sorry, do you have an appointment?" The receptionist, a young woman with a polite smile, looked up from her screen. "No, but tell him it's urgent. It's about a personal matter." I watched as she hesitated, then picked up the phone. A few tense minutes passed before she hung up. "You can go up, sir. Mr. Stevens will see you now." The elevator ride to the 10th floor was the longest of my life. Each ding seemed to echo in the hollow of my chest. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into a sleek, modern office space. It wasn't long before I saw him, Mark Stevens, the man who had helped shatter my world. "James, This is a surprise, Mark said, standing up from his desk, his face a mask of calm that did not reach his eyes. We need to talk, I said, closing the door behind me. About Betty? He was direct, perhaps trying to steer the conversation. Yes, about everything. About how you both betrayed me. My voice was low, controlled. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, James, I know you're upset. Upset? You think I'm just upset? I interrupted, anger flaring. You destroyed my marriage. And for what? A fling. It wasn't just a fling. But I admit, we should have handled things differently, he replied, his tone defensive yet remorseful. Differently? You shouldn't have handled it at all. I was shouting now, my composure cracking. You both lied to me, deceived me. And I trusted her, I trusted you, as a colleague, if nothing else. Mark was silent for a moment, then he looked up, meeting my gaze. What do you want, James? Justice. Retribution. I want everyone to know the kind of people you both are. My words were icy, calculated. And what? You'll ruin our careers, our lives. His voice was a mix of defiance and fear. If that's what it takes. I was unyielding, the hurt propelling my desire for revenge. We're both going to lose a lot over this, he said slowly. But hurting more people won't change what happened. I don't care. It's too late for regrets. You should have thought about the consequences before. As I turned to leave, Mark called out, James, think about what you're doing. There's a lot to lose here, for everyone. But I was already out the door, the echo of my footsteps a grim drumbeat to the chaos that was about to unfold. I had started down this path, and there was no turning back. The hurt had been done, and now the fallout was inevitable. The next steps were clear, each one leading further into the abyss of revenge. Today was just the beginning. The air was cool and sharp as I made my way to my final destination. The city around me seemed oblivious to the storm brewing in my heart. My mind was set, today would mark the end of the charade, the final act in my quest for retribution. I arrived outside the television station, a plan formulated over sleepless nights ready to unfold. With a deep breath, I walked inside, my folder of evidence secure under my arm. The receptionist eyed me curiously as I approached. I have a story. It involves a high-profile betrayal and corruption within a major corporation, I said, my voice even but firm. Interest flickered in her eyes. One moment, please, she said, picking up the phone. Minutes later, I was ushered into a small, stark room where a producer met me. I laid out everything, screenshots, emails, intimate messages, every sordid detail laid bare. The producer's eyes widened with each piece of evidence. This is explosive, he muttered, flipping through the documents. We can run with it tonight. Are you sure you want to go public with this? Yes, I replied, my resolve steel. It's time everyone knew the truth. The hours leading up to the broadcast were a blur. I sat in the shadows offset, watching as the story that had torn my life apart was about to break into the open. The news anchor's voice was grave as she introduced the segment, a stark contrast to the chaos it would unleash. As the story aired, detailing the affair between Betty and Mark, along with allegations of corruption and misconduct at their company, I felt a hollow victory. The faces of Betty and Mark flashed on the screen, their private transgressions laid out for all to see. The immediate fallout was intense. Social media erupted, the scandal trending within minutes. Calls for resignations and investigations into their company began to mount. I watched, detached, as the empire they built crumbled around them. But the true endgame was still to come. Later that night, I stood outside their apartment, the place I once called home. The street was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the city. I waited, the darkness my companion, until I saw them arrive together, broken and defeated. As they approached, I stepped out of the shadows, my presence catching them off guard. "James, what are you, why?" Betty's voice was a mix of fear and confusion. "You both destroyed everything." "I just returned the favor," I said, my voice cold and devoid of the love I once felt. "Is this what you wanted? To ruin us completely?" Mark's face was pale, his eyes haunted. "It's only what you deserved." "Betrayal for betrayal," I replied. Betty looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "There's nothing left now, James. Are you happy?" I looked at her, at them, feeling the weight of my actions. Happiness was never the point. Without another word, I turned and walked away, the cold night air filling the space between us. As I disappeared into the night, the finality of our parting was complete. There would be no forgiveness, no forgetting. The deception was too deep, the wounds too raw. The city swallowed me whole, a man reshaped by vengeance. In the end, the victory was as bitter as the betrayal that birthed it. I had sought justice, but at what cost? The answer echoed in the emptiness that followed, a hollow reminder of the price of revenge.